A very good morning and a warm welcome to all the esteemed guests, faculty members, audience present here today. I, Aditi Ambarkar, final year students of Electronics and Telecommunications Department, is pleased to have hosting this event on behalf of Indian Women Scientists Association and Space Geeks. Today, we have a distinguished panel of experts who will share their knowledge and insights on how the space creates sustainable technology. As we all know, space exploration has led to development of innovative technologies that have transformed our lives and made it more sustainable. The advancements in space technology have not only helped us understand the universe but also aided in solving some of the most pressuring issues on Earth, such as climate change, water scarcity, and renewable energy. We are honored to have with us Dr. Anita Sengupta, a veteran of space program, a NASA rocket scientist, who will enlighten us today with her knowledge and experience in the field of space technology. Ma'am, I welcome you to the dais, please. Can we have a round of applause? Okay. From IWSA, we have Dr. Surekha Zingre, who is the president of the Indian Women Scientists Association. Here she is to share her views on importance of sustainability in science. Ma'am, I welcome you to the dais. Please have a seat. We also have Devaki Ramanathan. Ma'am, could you please have a seat on the dais? From IWSA, we also have Dr. Tripti Tiwari. Ma'am, please could you have a seat on the dais? Lastly, we also have Dr. Chintamani Pai, the co-founder of Space Geeks, who will provide us with insights into how the organization is contributing to the development of sustainable technology in the space program. Sir, I please welcome you to the dais. Please have a seat. I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to all the speakers for taking their time out with us today to share their knowledge with us. I am confident that the event will be insightful and informative and leave us with deeper understanding of how space technology can lead to sustainable development. Once again, I welcome you all to the wonderful event. On a side note, as we move ahead, there's a gentle reminder that please have your phones switched off or on the silent mode to avoid any disturbances for the speakers or fellow audience members. So we move ahead. About IWSA. The Indian Women Scientists Association IWSA is a non-profit organization founded in 1973 by a group of women scientists in India. The aim of organization is to promote the advancement of science and technology among women in India and to encourage them to pursue their careers in science. IWSA provides a platform for networking and exchange of ideas and collaboration among women scientists, and organizes various activities such as workshops, seminars, and conferences to promote scientific research and education. The organization has played a significant role in empowering women in science and promoting gender equality in the field. I welcome Dr. Surekha Zingre, the trustee of Indian Women Scientists Association. She has worked at the Tata Memorial Center for 33 years as a professor and a former deputy director. She has a plethora of achievements under her name, which include Institute Silver Medal for securing the first position in MSc program at IIT Bombay, Dr. R. Kenjariwal Oration Award 2009 by the Gujarat Cancer and Research Institute, Ahmedabad. These are just to name a few. Now I welcome Dr. Surekha to the event. We are happy to have you here. Please share a few words.
have here. Good morning. I want to hear a good morning round from you all. Good morning. Thank you so much. I'd like to acknowledge the authorities of Father Ragnall College here today and the faculty who are here to join us and give us the opportunity to have Dr. Anita Sengupta to give a lecture along with the presence of Dr. Chidman. As you can see, we are the Indian Women Scientists Association, and over the next few minutes I'll literally run you through what we are and what we are doing to ensure that you get a bird's eye view. And you're not too far from us, almost like a walking distance away. I hope that after you've seen this presentation, you'll take it and you'll walk across and come to us and visit us. So we, as you know, this is our 50th year, a big event for us, a golden jubilee year as we look back. And we take this opportunity to look back, to move forward and to soar higher in the mandates that we have. So this is the Indian Women Scientists Association in Sector 10A. Not very far from you, and we are celebrating 50 years of the science for our society. You can see here the hostel building, and I will be referring to it as we go along. And this is our activity block. This is an institution which was started long back in 1973 as a vision and a testimony. It stands as a testimony of 12 women who believe that science for society is a must for women empowerment and gender equality. And these are our founder members. 4 of them were from the Cancer Research Institute, 5 from the Bhabha Atomic Research Center, and the remaining 3 from other institutions. And over the last 50 years, you will note that through the efforts of these ladies, the 12 founder members, and hundreds of volunteers who have worked along with them, we have managed to grow our membership to about 2,000 and also build alongside branches right from Roorkee in the north to Nellore in the south, and IFSA headquarters is based in Vashi, and that is the building that you were seeing. So the work that we do is in 2 arms. One of them we call as community welfare, which is associated with women empowerment. And today, this whole week is International Women's Week, if you must. So the slides are meant to portray that, if you will. So we have a working women's hostel, which was set up on this campus, which was set up only between 1989 or so. And the first hostelite came in this building at that time. And it's a safe haven for anybody who is coming from far and wide across the nation, to be financially independent, to take care of their social responsibilities, and to be fulfilling their dreams. You know, all girls want to be independent and work and do what they would like. So we have a 120-bedded hostel, wherein they have the opportunity to be free and be safe. I have to beat the sound about the also learning. Okay. A nice place to be staying. The girls are very happy over there, and it's home away from home for most of them. As you know, many of us ladies have responsibilities at home. We are little children, and we'd like to be able to fulfill our dreams, but we also, at the back of our mind, sure that our babies are taken care of. A daycare center was started almost in parallel to the hostel in 1990. Presently, it can accommodate about 36 little children from the age group of 6 months to 10 years for boys and 13 years for girls. It's open from 7:30 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. Then we have a nursery school which is again started started on the behest of the members of the daycare to ensure that the little children got an opportunity to learn while they were at this play school. And here the play day method is used to teach the little kids. And what the ECC program, or the Early Childhood Care and Education Program, has got its nomenclature along with the NEP, the New Education Policy. It was called the Bal Sankoban program, and it was started way back almost 2 decades ago, more than 25 years ago, where we used to give a certificate course to ladies who are being taught in Marathi. And now this course is in English. It is under the SNDT Women's University. It's a 1-year diploma course. It's open to any lady who is having a 12th standard pass. Age is no bar. Please remember this. So among the audience here, if there is anybody who has friends who want a vocational program, this is the program to catch on to, and we open our new academic year in June. So do visit with us and find out more details. This program also has, alongside with it, another NGO. We work to be inclusive. We have courses for children who are learning deficient, have learning disorders, and so we have shadow teachers programs, and also how to understand these children who have attention deficit hypersensitivity disorders. And here you can see the girls who have got diplomas. We have a healthcare center wherein we have a physiotherapist and a dentist. You can nominally price. We conduct cancer detection camps, which will be one of them, which will be conducted in 25th of March. And we also have large numbers of lectures and wellness and good health programs, even for geriatrics issues. A computer center started way back in 91, when probably the first desktop computer came to India here. But it was felt that we should have computers, so we have moved with the times. Today this computer center takes care of requests from little children, homemakers and senior citizens, and also for students who come here to learn molecular modeling, protein-protein interactions, next-gen sequencing alignments, and so forth. So we moved from just apps to, high-end bioinformatic analysis. A library, which is now started when the institute was started long back in 73. In this place now we have support from the Directorate of Libraries in Maharashtra, and 5,000 books. The books also for little children, the ECC program, and for general public. You are free to become members. You don't have to be a lady. Any gent can also be a member here. And more, it is a lovely reading place for young girls who are looking for UPSC, CAT, SET, whatever, these lovely exams that they have to all pass to get into the next level of qualifications, and they don't have a place to study at home. So here you can see the girls study. Another very important program is our scholarship awards. We have well-wishers who have donated their money. The corpus generates interest. The interest is given to students at a with different annual incomes for BSc, MSc and PhD programs. So these applications go out at the end of November, December, so that keep looking out. So if anybody does need some assistance among your fellow students, do apply for them at the same time. Next is science awareness. And this science awareness starts right from daycare to school children, to college students, and also to general public. We don't believe in, just sticking to one level. So as I mentioned, the ECC program connects science and teaches science in the little ways that little children can understand, both at the nursery school and the daycare center. We have the science nurture program, where many of our volunteers here today take so active part to have students from the neighboring school who come to ILSA, and where they go through the school syllabus with the children, show them videos, do hands-on experiments, and make science really fun, and not the way it is taught in several of the schools. And these children come in as shy little boys and girls and walk out confidently. Many of them can even make PowerPoint presentations of a project which they did in school. And it's very amazing experience for all the teachers who have been helping them out. We have a science club along with the Vigyan Prasar. It's called the VIPNet Club for the schools. And we recently had a science exhibition. Here you can see the children crowding around a DAE exhibition showing how waste can be managed. And these same students also had projects which they displayed and explained to the public who visited. During the pandemic, we didn't stop. We moved on with online interactions. And another part that's very interesting is we made sure that college students know that it's their responsibility. They are more privileged. They could teach a little school girl or a boy from school and help them with their studies. So we call it as the Each One Teach One program, and all this happened online under the mentorship of our own volunteers. Third one is now the Learning Garden and the Green Initiatives. As it was mentioned, we have these green initiatives. We have our own solar system. We generate our power there, and the excess power is transferred to the grid, and for which we get benefits. Solar water heater for the hostels, and a lovely garden which hosts almost 500 odd different plants of different varieties, and indoor and outdoor plants, and also medicinal plants, though they have drugs and color producing plants and so forth. A lot of visitors, senior members who come to see youngsters from colleges visiting, you can make out they are here. And our members have gotten together actually to bring out a book on wild forgotten foods and to make recipe book, much sought after and much acclaimed by nutritionists in this country. We also show them ways of how to get rid of the or biodegrade waste on campus. And this is also a demonstration plant which is seen on our campus, so do visit. Next one. And then IFSA's internship program for college students. We have done this with several colleges now. Our members bring out projects and given to students either in groups or as singular projects to students. And during this process, there are presentations by experts, and the projects are evaluated, and there are eventually sometimes leading to in-house publications. So you see expert lectures, little booklets come out from the interns what they have done, and we also have the final review from India and abroad. And here you can see several of these interns actually helping out on our garden under the watchful eyes of our veteran ladies who ensure that whatever needs to be done is done properly, and the students who are on campus learn about it. And here we have this year's science exhibition on Science Day was about smart waste management technology. Here you can see the youngsters with their project being reviewed by Dr. Devti, who is here with us, and Dr. Rohit Manchanda is here with us, who is a well-acknowledged social activist for mangrove saving in the Vashi area. And DAE exhibition is seen at the backside. Here is another batch of students exhibiting their projects. Our Roorkee branch has been running a maths Olympiad over several years now, and IFSA headquarters joined with them for the school classes of 6th standard to 9th standard, and there were about near 500 students from Mumbai Atomic Energy schools who took part in this, along with around 1,000 students from the Haridwar and Roorkee branch areas who participated in this Olympiad, and they could be identified for how they fared. Our work is recognized by UNESCO New Delhi, and we are included in this book, which was brought exactly a year ago on the last year's Women's Day. Next. And we have not stopped there. We run popular science lectures which are supported through the Board of Research in Nuclear Sciences. You are one of them here today. We do them in schools, whether they are well-funded schools or schools not so well-funded, but they all enjoy listening to the lectures. We have lectures from individuals with extremely good backgrounds, academic institutions and industries. And the questions they ask are so amazing. I mean, we are all overjoyed that we can take science to that level. Colleges in Mumbai and our branches, big audiences, small audiences, it doesn't matter, the science gets there. We also take lectures under the Science in Our Life series to general public online, and it could be anything from aerospace journey to TB. You know, the topics are quite wide and large. We also have lecture workshops and refresher courses, either be for college faculty, or it could be college students and faculty, or it could be for school teachers. And these two are essentially supported to the science academies of this country. And we move on. This is Women's Year again. We are now, saying women can do it. So here, women in science and technology, soaring on the wings of change. And we have with us today Dr. Anita Sengupta, who's really soaring high, and I think she becomes part of this team here to ensure and show you that women can do it. So those of you interested, there will be talks, anything from basic sciences to technology to computers to space exploration and entrepreneurship. So boys are allowed to register too, and so are ladies. So if you have little projects that you're doing online here, not online at your college, and especially in your third year, please do submit an abstract. We are open up till 19th of March to accept abstracts. You'll get all the details at this. Take a picture if you have your cameras, and you can click in and see it, and we can also send you in case you miss this out. So we are not stopping at women and getting you to listen to the high-end lectures. We are also bringing science to the young children. So today we have this Science Lit Festival, which is for little children, and it's today 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. at IPSA. Bring your little friends, your younger children with you, or your young neighbors, and I'm sure they will enjoy it. This is free entry. Do come in. It's going to be science at that level, with the little youngsters will enjoy. I hope you will take this opportunity either to join us for the triennial or to bring your friends along today for this. And as I mentioned, this is today at between 4 and 8 p.m. at IPSA. And thank you for your attention. And you will note, we share our knowledge to bring about a change, to provide and create innovation, always keeping science at the back of our mind, and help us in our endeavors to help others. Thank you for your attention again. And Dr. Anita Sengupta for being here and being part of IPSA to be able to communicate science to this audience today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. It was lovely to hear from you. It actually is truly commendable what IPSA does for women empowerment, and it fills my heart with joy just to see women supporting women. And with that positive note, I would move on to Dr. Chintamani Pai. Dr. Chintamani Pai is a researcher working in domains of photonics and magnetism with an interest in aerospace technologies. In 2011, he was selected for NASA in CITES program to experience the work interplanetary space mission. Dr. Pai has also received the Best Poster Award in DAE SSPS 2018 Conference of TechHertz and Magnetic Nanofluids, carried out in collaboration with Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, Mumbai, and Nanyang Technological Institute, Singapore. I would request Sir to present a few words.
Very good morning to all of you, and I thank organizers of this event for first of all organizing in a very planned manner, and I must share my experience with IWSA. I am very much grateful to them for in a very short time to organize this talk, because when I think 20-25 days back Dr. Anita Sengupta told me she is visiting Mumbai, and parallelly even I was caught up with some other projects pitching. So I mean, very short time, I approached IWSA, Dr. Lalita Dhareshwar, who is in, I think, Bangalore right now. So she told me, why not? We would love to organize such a talk. And I must share with you my story with IWSA, that I was aware about IWSA as a student. So I attended, I think, their laser workshop in the year 2016 as a PhD student. And thanks to my collaborator, Professor Nagarajan from DAE, who told me, Chintamani, IWS is organizing laser workshop. I think since you are doing experimental physics, you are interested in optics, photonics, you should go and attend this workshop. And that is how I got in touch with IWSA. And since then, that journey started ever expanding. So in the next workshop, they invited me as one of the experts to demonstrate a laser microscope. And later on, we never stopped looking back. We in fact organized through Space Gigs, which is a startup started by myself and my other colleagues who are also researchers. We in fact went on organizing a first workshop in the country to bring space and astronomy at school level and teaching teachers how to introduce these concepts at school level and college level. And that was done in collaboration with Department of Science and Technology, Government of India. And I must thank IWSA for providing us that opportunity and platform at every time so that we could expand our activities and our whole motto of getting into the domains of space education and space technology. We are very much grateful to have this contribution from IWSA. Excuse me. And so coming to the Space Gigs, which is a small startup we started back in 2018. We started with a motivation, three of us, myself, and then Dr. Ankush Bhaskar and Dr. Virendra Yadav. We were that time PhD students at University of Mumbai, and we used to organize small workshops in astronomy, space, and we thought that as a researchers, we should not restrict ourselves in four walls of our laboratories, but we should go beyond that so that whatever science or technology, whatever endeavors we initiate, they should reach out to masses. So as a very initial step, we started doing some outreach programs in space and astronomy. And based on that, we later started taking technological leaps. And now I am proud to say that we are at such a state that we have gone into some technological domains, especially in the drone technology. And even there is a small story behind this. In the year 2019, we were approached by a Norwegian company that they were interested to see stars from ocean. So imagine if you want to see stars from vessels, you will always have the vessels which keep moving. And then if you are looking at very distant objects, you will not able to see them properly. So very first technological project was initiated in the year 2019. And later on, we have a platform now which can actually eliminate the vessel motion. But we didn't stop at that level. We further went on developing a platform, which is now you can see the drone, which can actually land on this platform. So if you are looking at developing a technology for using drones for the surveillance or even for the meteorological purpose in the oceans, we have a platform where we have contributed by developing some algorithms, and even at sensors level, these drones can smoothly land in rough seas. So I'll show you the video. So these are our test runs in Norwegian seas, where you can see the vessel is moving, but the platform is parallel with the ground. So which has lots of applications, and we are now bringing that technology. We have already brought that technology in India, and we are pitching to various applications. So this can go as a healthcare applications also. If there are very critical patients, you want to transport them. So even these platforms can go on aircraft. So in fact, one such project we pitched to the Boeing IIT Aerospace Institution, and we even cleared the technical rounds. So those projects are in the pipeline. So I think with that, without taking much of your time, I think we should proceed for the main talk. Thank you for giving us opportunity. The whole motivation for showing this was we started from zero. I mean, tomorrow you can also start from zero. I mean, the time there will be hurdles, there will be delays, but if you have a motivation, you can start something from zero, and you can aim higher. And here we are having a supersonic woman who designed the supersonic parachute for the NASA's Mars mission. And as ma'am rightly said, that this is the week for celebrating International Women's Day. We have a right person to encourage us, to inspire us, and I think all of us are fortunate to have expert like Dr. Anita Sengupta, and I think with her talk, definitely your dreams can go higher. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pai. As you said that if you start from zero, you can definitely aim higher was really motivating. It is great that Space Geeks is contributing towards some extremely innovative technologies. These technologies will definitely make disruptions in the field of healthcare, as you mentioned, and it's extremely commendable. Thank you, sir. Moving ahead, we have our keynote speaker and someone everyone here has been definitely waiting for, Dr. Anita Sengupta. Dr. Anita Sengupta Dr. Anita Sengupta is a highly accomplished and innovative engineer renowned for her exceptional contributions in the field of aerospace and transportation. With a distinguished career spanning over 2 decades, she has established herself as a prominent figure in the industry, with a track record of success in managing exceptionally high-profile projects. Born in Galsburg, Scotland, to a family of diverse cultural heritage, Dr. Sengupta brings a unique perspective to her work, enriched by experiences in different parts of the world. Dr. Anita's impressive academic credentials include a bachelor's degree in aerospace engineering from the University of Southern California, a master's degree in aerospace engineering from the University of Illinois, and a PhD in aerospace engineering from the University of Southern California. She subsequently served as a project manager of Cold Atom Laboratory at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, Caltech, where she oversaw the development and launch of a revolutionary technology that has transformed the field of atomic physics. More recently, Dr. Anita has made a significant impact in transportation industry as a senior vice systems engineer at Virgin Hyperloop One. In this role, she has been instrumental in leading the development of world's first fully operational Hyperloop system, a cutting-edge transportation technology that has the potential to revolutionize the way goods are moved across the globe. Dr. Sengupta's innovative visionary leadership, coupled with her expertise in engineering and project management, has earned her numerous accolades and recognition through her career. She has also been given the title of Top 10 Women Engineers by Society of Women Engineers and has received the NASA Exceptional Engineering Achievement Medal and the NASA Space Technology Award, among many others. Her unwavering dedication to excellence and her position for innovation is a true inspiration to engineers, women, and aspiring scientists all over the world. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Dr. Anita Sengupta.
Thank you for the introduction. Can I use the handheld or is it not working? Oh, great. Thank you. Happy to be here, and we haven't been to Mumbai since 2019 because of COVID hit, so this is my first trip back to India since COVID, and really appreciative that you were able to put together my lecture on such short notice to the Indian Women's Science Association to Space Geeks Mumbai. Really appreciate it. Love doing science communication. Love doing science communication in India because I think there's definitely more of a cultural emphasis on science and technology here than probably any other country in the world, and I do speak all over the world on topics related to space exploration. My motivation to become an engineer actually has always been to facilitate the exploration of space ever since I was a little girl. My father was a mechanical engineer. He got his bachelor's and master's degree here in India in mechanical engineering, and then went over to the United Kingdom to get his PhD. And he did actually go to IIT Bombay for his master's degree. So he spent quite a bit of time in Mumbai as well, and I have several family members who live here as well. But always wanted to follow in his footsteps because engineers basically create technologies that can solve all kinds of problems around the world. I myself have two roles now. My part-time role is I'm a research professor at the University of Southern California in the Astronautics and Space Technology Department. My full-time role is as CEO of my company, Hydroplane Limited. And I'll talk a little bit about my company as well, just because I want to motivate people here to actually start their own companies, because being an entrepreneur is probably the most fun but most challenging thing I've ever done in my career. And then a couple of years ago, they did like this little feature on me at USC where they made a bunch of artwork featuring different things that were important to me. So some artists actually made this picture of a habitat on the surface of Mars, so that was kind of fun. And then I am pretty active on social media. Unfortunately, I don't use Instagram myself, but my company does use Instagram, so you can find us at Hydroplane Aero. I do use Twitter myself, and for the company as well. So that's how I prefer to engage, because it's easy and fast. So we can go to the next slide. So my background is all engineering, all aerospace engineering. I know we were talking about it this morning a little bit over breakfast, but to work for the space program, you don't have to be an aerospace engineer. You can be a mechanical engineer, electrical engineer, computer scientist, chemical engineer, scientist, aerospace engineer. It kind of depends what you focus on. I always wanted to do the aerospace, fluids, thermo side of things. That's what I find most interesting. And I did spend the bulk of my career working for NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, about 16 years. I had a couple of years stint at Boeing before that, working on the development of launch vehicles. But even though I really loved working for the space program, after about 20 years, I decided I wanted to leave, and I wanted to go into the green transportation space. Because I think, as you're all experiencing, as I'm experiencing, climate change is real. It's affecting our daily lives, it's affecting our air quality, it's changing the dynamic nature of our climate. Even just a few weeks ago in California, the weather has completely shifted. I personally experienced a mudslide in the back of my house, where my neighbor's property literally fell down into my backyard. So climate change is something that affects all of us quite literally at home. So now is a really good time to think about, as you're entering the workforce, how you can make your job something to help mitigate climate change, so a way to kind of solve problems that we have in society. So I did leave NASA after about 20 years in the field, and I joined Virgin Hyperloop as an executive developing carbon emission-free transportation systems. I did that for a few years. Then I worked a little bit for a battery-powered aircraft company. Then I decided to start my own company, because one of the things that I realized over the course of time is sometimes you are the best advocate for something that you believe in, and if that can be pushing forward a research program as a researcher, you can do that as an academic in academia, or you can do that as a startup founder, where you can actually create the technology that you want according to the rules that you want, if it's your own company or if it's your own research lab. Oh, thank you. Okay, I do think another thing which is important, and you alluded to it as well during the presentation, is that having good work-life balance, right? You can't just work 24 hours a day. You also have to have time for your family. You have to have time for your hobbies, and you have to have good work-life balance. That's really important. I would say now in today's society, everybody's recognizing that, because it's really easy to get burnt out if you work, 14 hours a day or something like that, which sometimes I do, by the way. But I do have a lot of hobbies in my spare time. One of my primary hobbies actually is flying small planes. And so I've been a pilot for many, many years. I got my commercial license actually just last year, so I could actually fly what my company is developing, commercially, to take passengers around. Not that that will be my full-time job, but I have the ability to do it. But I take a lot of time to enjoy myself, whether that's traveling around the world, giving talks, or I like to do bicycling, mountain biking, and I also like to do hiking, and I also like to fly small planes, which does have a bad carbon footprint. But I do think it's important to give yourself those kinds of options so that you have a healthy and fun life. But in almost all instances of all the projects that I've worked on, they've been really difficult problems. And ironically, at least in US culture, people say, oh, it's not rocket science, meaning that it's something complicated. And oftentimes it does take a very complex solution to actually solve a problem, right? If it was easy, then it would have already been solved. So if someone's coming up with a super, super simple solution to something, it may not be the right one, but complexity actually can lead to great innovation, great solutions. And so I joke that sometimes it does take rocket science to solve some challenges. But The space program has received a lot of criticism. So in Europe, for example, people will say, why are you spending money on exploring other worlds when you should be solving challenges here at home, whether that's climate change related or energy related or something like that. And that is a good point, right? There is a limited number of resources, so you should put those resources to something useful and something good. But I would argue that the space program has created many technologies that enable us to live the lives that we live today, whether that's from the communication side of things or from the energy technology side of things. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. But there is an argument to say that the push for space tourism, which is kind of represented here with Blue Origin and Jeff Bezos going into space, or space tourism with Richard Branson's model of things, which is actually very bad for the environment, the type of technology they use, is that a good thing? Is that something we should focus resources on? Is sending very wealthy people into space a good idea? And there's been conversations, even Prince William from the UK was saying how, is that really a good focus for us? And I think it's a debate to be had, it's a healthy debate, it's a debate we should have, right? Because there are limited resources, we do have limited time to solve the challenge of climate change, and how best do we allocate our resources in that way. And it's important as engineers, as scientists, and as technologists, that you don't simply do the work that's given to you. You think about the social implications of what it is that you're doing, because you're the ones who are going to take the reins from the people who are currently in leadership today. But as I said a while back, I'm a huge science fiction fan. So just last year, I think it was, I had an opportunity to do a TV show with William Shatner. So obviously I'm a big fan of his, I'm a Star Trek fan. That may be too old for a lot of you in the room, but I'm a fan. So that was actually a lot of fun. And ironically, many people become engineers because of motivation from watching science fiction or reading science fiction, for example. And I certainly did, so I'm definitely guilty of that. And what I think is really neat about the genre of science fiction is that many of the technologies that are proposed in science fiction, whether that's the flip phone, the tablet, or forms of transport, actually came about in the science fiction medium. Then some person who became an engineer is like, well, you know, I'm going to make that real. And then the engineer literally can turn science fiction into reality. And what that means is that as individuals, we can actually create with technology or with technological solutions the future that we imagine it to be. So that's very powerful. So you have within your own skill set as graduating students the ability to make almost any change. And a great example of that with COVID, right? It was technology that developed the rapid design, implementation, and distribution of a vaccine. And in the past, that would have taken many years to do. This happened all in a period of 6 months. So literally, you can make a lot of really positive change as a scientist, as an engineer, as a technologist. But, and this is a great quote, I think, on the topic of that. But I think what is important, though, is that there's the other side of things, which is that you can also make, technology can make the world a worse place, and I'll talk about that a little bit. But this is another example of a quote from a science fiction book and movie that I like, The Martian, where basically science can solve a lot of the challenges that we have in society. But there is utopian science fiction, which is like Star Trek, and then there's dystopian science fiction, and this comes from Blade Runner 2049, and this is Los Angeles in the distant future, I would argue not too distant future, where air quality is horrific. Pretty much all forms of plant life have died off, and it's not a nice place to live, and human beings have essentially destroyed their climate. And unfortunately, you know, we're not too far away from this, right? We're probably only another decade or two before it really does get that bad. So as much as we call this science fiction, it is unfortunately becoming a reality. So we all do have to think about the environmental cost of what we do, how we can make changes in our own life to mitigate that, and make changes in the way that we select what our next job will be to overcome that. But not to be doom and glooming, but it's reality. We're all facing it. And the irony is that the space program, and of course I have more of an emphasis on the NASA side of the space program, it's all about understanding how planets change at the planetary level. And the 3 planets that you see featured here, Earth is obviously the one in the middle. It's nice, it's got oxygen-rich atmosphere, temperature's not too hot, not too cold. One planet in from us, Venus, has a temperature of 470 degrees centigrade and atmospheric pressure 100 times the surface pressure here on Earth. Mars, one planet out from us, has no appreciable atmosphere, about 1% of the surface density, incredibly cold temperatures, right? So human beings, organisms could not live on Venus, they could not live on Mars. But when the solar system originally formed, these planets were actually a lot more similar to each other in terms of having water on the surface, in terms of having a better environment for organisms to potentially thrive in. So you can see that climate change does happen on the planetary scale. And one of the reasons why NASA missions exist is actually to understand how these planetary changes happen. So, for those of us in the room, if we're building up a line, 3 points make a pretty good line, so we can see a trend here, unfortunately. So, something we have to think about once again. And once again, the space program gives us that knowledge of how our climate is changing from satellites that orbit the Earth, and gives us the ability to understand these planetary level changes with these other planets in our solar system, which help us to understand our own planet even more better, interestingly enough. And the reality is, human population is growing, we're using more energy, we're producing more emissions. So the carbon footprint of us and the permitted emissions is actually increasing. And ironically, the good news is for smaller cars, you can decarbonize those with batteries, but for things other than smaller cars, heavy-duty vehicles, buses, trucks, trains, rail, aircraft, those cannot be decarbonized with batteries because batteries are too heavy. So we know that we have to do something to reduce our transport sector emissions in the near future. And this other graphic, which I think is useful, is to understand what the CO2 output is for different modes of transport, and then what the secondary emissions are, which are even worse for aviation, for example. But ultimately, shared transport is the way that we can reduce our per passenger kilometer, and of course, shifting to new technologies which don't put out CO2 is the other way that we can reduce emissions. And when you look at total emissions of CO2 from us as a society, about 22% comes from the transport sector. So it's a pretty sizable chunk. There's also industrial, there's also agriculture, and there are other ways to mitigate those. But what is so great about engineering, different from every other field out there, is we're always about reinventing ourselves, coming up with new, great solutions to problems. And we think about that from a systems engineering perspective. I spent many years being a systems engineer. We think about what are the things that drive the product that we're trying to create. One of them, of course, is environmental impact, right? We want to have less of an environmental impact. Another one, of course, is safety. The last thing we would want to do is create a new transportation system which is less safe than the existing ones. That would be disastrous. Another one is cost, right? If something's too expensive, no government is going to pay to invest in the infrastructure, no individual is going to buy the vehicle, and people who are lower income won't be able to have access to it. So cost is super important. It's also related to accessibility, right? If it's too expensive, it's not accessible. And then the other really important one for transportation is interoperability, right? You can't build a bridge to nowhere. The bridge has to connect you to somewhere so you can get on the next form of transportation. So these are ways of thinking about system level engineering requirements that impact anything that you're going to do in the transportation space to make it more efficient. And you kind of have to think that way. You can't think isolated in a box, for example. And so one of the technologies that I spent about 2 years developing was the Hyperloop. It definitely has its origins in the space program. It's pretty much like a spacecraft traveling on the ground. So the reason why it's like a spacecraft is that its principle of operation is to operate within a vacuum. So you create a cylindrical tubular structure where you use pumps to remove all of the air from it so that you now have essentially a vacuum around a vehicle. That vehicle then is able to be propelled with linear electric propulsion without the primary energy sink, which is aerodynamic drag. So drag goes up with the velocity squared. So if you go faster and faster, you generate more drag, you're losing more energy. So if you can put your vessel inside of a vacuum environment, it no longer has to deal with aerodynamic drag. So that's the principle of a Hyperloop. It is an electromagnetically levitating, sort of like a maglev train, but in a vacuum tube. And most of the technologies here do take their inspiration in some way from the space program, especially the vacuum aspect of that. So there was a real big push to implement this technology in Mumbai a couple of years ago when I actually worked for Virgin Hyperloop. And I think the reason why it hasn't happened yet is because this is very expensive to implement. I talked about cost earlier. It is higher risk, meaning you have to put a lot of money into develop the technology before you actually get the product out of it. And governments have to make that kind of decision that that's a worthwhile expenditure versus investing in something else, like a regular train, for example, or high-speed rail, or a light rail type of system. But in principle, if unlimited resources were available, which they're not, then this would be a good system, which does take most of its inspiration from the space program. And because it can go super fast, it can actually replace aircraft. So this can actually go faster than airline speeds, and then give you that regional connectivity so that you can get from Mumbai to Delhi, for example, the flight that I took yesterday, with zero emissions because it's using electric propulsion. So that's a great example of one which I think will happen in the next 1 to 2 decades, but it's obviously not going to happen next year. So we did actually develop a prototype for this. This is one of the advantages of being in the startup world, is that you can operate more cost effectively because you're a smaller company, less infrastructure, less overhead. So you can develop a prototype quickly and test it and show that it works. But then you've got to get more money to get it to product, to get it into implementation. So this is where I think the Hyperloop struggles, because it's so expensive to implement a ground-based infrastructure project. You can't just do it on a small budget. You've got to do it with government investment. So I think it will happen, but it's probably not going to happen in the next 5 years. But it might happen in the next, 10 to 15 years is kind of the goal. But all of the companies working in the Hyperloop space are small companies. They're all startups. So that's kind of very different. Like normally you wouldn't find a sector which was just startups. That's because the pre-existing companies don't have the agility, don't have the vision, basically, to come up with these types of new solutions. But in all instances, for these new technologies in the transportation space, we have to think about our source of energy. And that source of energy needs to be green, meaning coming from renewable sources. And when we think about traditional renewable energies, we think about solar. So you probably have solar here in India. We've got tons of solar in the United States. You can think about wind. We also have tons of wind in the United States. I don't know how much wind turbines you have out here. And then we have to think about how you're going to store that energy. Do you store that energy by putting it into a lithium-ion battery? Do you store it in a hydrogen fuel cell by basically taking some electricity to create hydrogen and then running it through a fuel cell? Or, of course, something which is not green is gas, right? This is a hydrocarbon. That's just on there to show you the different options that are out there. But it is important to think about how you store your energy so that you can use it in your mobile transport application moving forward. And this is a great example of something which also takes its inspiration from the space program. So it's not just a static solar cell, like solar voltaics that you see on this lower image, but instead it is a solar concentrator where a mirror is actuated all throughout the day to maximize the amount of light which goes onto the mirror, which is then reflected onto a platform which carries a molten material which gets hot, which then turns the turbine and creates electricity. And so we actually have one of these facilities out in the desert in Los Angeles, which is where I live. And this actuation of solar concentrators is something which actually was developed for the space program. You can use it here on the ground. And this facility is powerful because it can produce the same amount of power, but at a much smaller footprint on the ground as just using solar photovoltaics, for example. So many different solutions to the green energy production problem, and how we store it and how we utilize on the vehicles, what I'll talk about going forward. But ironically, when we think about renewable energy, what we don't talk about, maybe in the context of batteries, is are batteries really renewable, right? Because they're using a bunch of lithium, they're using a bunch of rare earth minerals that you have to mine, and when the battery doesn't work as well, it gets tossed and it becomes a bit of a waste. So one could very easily argue that batteries are not a good solution for renewable because it's not tied to a renewable resource. However, if you look at the most abundant element in the universe, it's actually hydrogen. Hydrogen is what you find out in space. Hydrogen is what you find powering stars, such as our sun. So the most abundant element in the universe is actually hydrogen, ironically. So the word hydrogen actually means water genesis in Greek. So if you split up water, which is H2O, using a process called electrolysis, which is putting electricity into the water molecule, you actually generate hydrogen and you generate oxygen. A fuel cell operates by combining hydrogen and oxygen. And what do you get as a byproduct? You get water out. So that's why hydrogen means water genesis. And ultimately, if you could electrolyze water, which is also a renewable resource, there's plenty of water, it's tied to the water cycle obviously on Earth, you can produce your hydrogen that way. So if your electricity comes from a green source, you now have green hydrogen is what it's referred to as. And guess what? Hydrogen fuel cells also get their origin from the space program. They were developed for Apollo, which was the lunar exploration program, and also for the space shuttle mission. So hydrogen fuel cells are an alternative to a lithium-ion battery. They're actually much more energy dense than a lithium-ion battery. And for this reason, they were used for the primary energy storage means for the Apollo missions and for the space shuttle missions. And how you use a proton exchange membrane fuel cell in space is different than how you use it here on Earth, because it does require oxygen, so you have to carry a supply of oxygen with you. But of course on Earth you don't have to do that because you can get oxygen from the air. So it's basically an air-breathing propulsion system. But NASA is still actively interested in hydrogen fuel cell technology for things like lunar bases, Mars bases, and even energy storage for flying aircraft on Mars, for example, in the graphic that you can see on the right over here. And we have this great translation of hydrogen fuel cell technology from space down to Earth, because we already have commercially available cars in the United States. Ironically, they're made by Japanese and Korean car vendors, and I have one. So that's my hydrogen fuel cell car that I drive in Southern California and Los Angeles. And it is an electric vehicle. It has an electric propulsion system. It uses an electric motor, but instead of having heavy, and I would argue CO2 intense batteries, right, because you have to mine the material, it instead has a hydrogen fuel cell system and hydrogen storage tanks on board. So this is a now commercially available technology for automotive, which could be implemented anywhere around the world if you have hydrogen infrastructure. In the United States, we do have hydrogen infrastructure in California. Unfortunately, we don't in other states, but it's happening, it's working, and I think even in India, there's a big push to generate more hydrogen production and then be able to use it in vehicle applications, and I believe there are some buses that are being proposed. But right now, it does exist, commercially available in the passenger vehicle space. And certainly in California we have them, but hopefully it happens all over the world. And of course I think they have them in China as well, and also in Japan, which is where this technology was originally created by Toyota. It's a particular interest Toyota, but I think Honda has one and Hyundai has one as well. And yeah, so I think it's fantastic because it's also affordable, right? If it's used in an automotive application, it means it now has economies of scale, becomes affordable, it becomes accessible, therefore it will become more ubiquitous. So what can make hydrogen environmentally friendly is that if it's produced with electrolysis, which comes from electricity, which is produced from solar, wind, something renewable. And so that is referred to as green hydrogen. And so renewable electricity goes into an electrolyzer, and then you have to store the hydrogen. It's typically stored in a liquid form, which is a cryogenic, and then it can be used by a variety of different use cases. The more use cases there are for hydrogen, the lower the cost of hydrogen per unit mass, per unit kilogram, which then ends up making it more affordable for everybody else. So although there's a big industry that uses hydrogen for chemical manufacturing purposes, there's now a burgeoning industries in shipping, in aviation, and in ground transport that wants to use hydrogen as an alternative to lithium-ion energy storage if you're going to do electric propulsion. This is good news in that sense. It's one of these things, it's a chicken and the egg problem. The more people need it, the more which is made, then it lowers the cost because there's more production. But not to bore you with numbers, but it does matter how much something costs, right? So right now you can buy hydrogen, which is made by reforming fossil fuels, which obviously is not environmentally friendly. That's cheap in comparison to green hydrogen, which is more expensive because there's not as much of it being produced. But the good news is that if you can make more green hydrogen be made, that ends up means you produce more green electricity, which will then reduce the price of your electricity to your house, as well as reduce the price of fuel. So we already see this with electric cars. Electric cars are cheaper to operate from a fuel economy perspective than gasoline-powered cars because the price of electricity is actually pretty low. So if hydrogen is made by green hydrogen sources, eventually, if there's enough of it, and you basically mitigate the cost of the electrolyzer, then you can make it more affordable. So everybody is showing, like the EU models are showing that by 2030, basically the price of green hydrogen will get to where it currently is for gray hydrogen. It becomes really cheap. And even now in California, when I fuel my car with hydrogen, which is produced as green hydrogen, it's about the same cost as gasoline, right? So it's already kind of a drop in replacement, which is really good news, right? Because nobody is going to adopt a new technology, no matter how much you care about the environment, if it's super expensive. That's just reality. So when it becomes affordable, people will actually use it. So why hydrogen? Well, I go back to the space program. Once again, the most efficient rocket propellant oxidizer combination out there on Earth is liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen. My first job out of school was developing the cryogenic propulsion system for the Delta IV launch vehicle, which was liquid hydrogen, liquid oxygen based. And the reason for this is the amount of energy per unit mass that exists in hydrogen. This bar chart here compares hydrogen to Jet A, which is jet fuel for aircraft, and it's 3 times the amount of energy per unit mass. This is the reason why you want to use hydrogen and oxygen. This is when you look at it from a combustion perspective. When you, instead of combusting a fuel and oxidizer, you use it electrochemically, you get even more efficiency out of it because you're not losing the energy as waste heat. So when you have a combustion cycle, you have a certain amount of the energy which is going into mechanical motion, but actually the majority of the energy is lost as waste heat, which means it isn't doing anything for you. When you use it electrochemically, you get basically close to a factor of 2 better than that. So that's why if you can go with hydrogen because of the inherent energy density of it, energy per unit mass, as well as the electrochemical conversion, you get to much, much better fuel economy. And we just put in a proposal for a boat application where we were looking at a 20% improvement in efficiency compared to the diesel alternative, which translates to a lot less fuel, a lot lower weight of your fuel on board the craft, and a lot better performance from a payload and a range perspective. And then the other beauty of it is hydrogen can be produced anywhere. Right? You don't have to tie yourself in to sources of oil in different places in the world. You have water, you electrolyze it, you produce it locally, you use it locally, right? So even your transport carbon footprint is unlimited to where you produce it. So it has all these wonderful advantages born of the space program, meaning I'm using it for my launch vehicle propulsion system, but using it here for this terrestrial application, and instead of combusting it, using it electrochemically. And we can talk about this in the Q&A. Now, fuel cell technology may not be a good fit for high altitude aircraft, but certainly is a good fit for low altitude aircraft. So you may need to shift over to combustion for higher altitude aircraft. But the bad news is that when you combust something, it has a high temperature in the exhaust, which means that you're going to put out NOx emissions, which is good. That's a greenhouse gas. But it still might be better than CO2, for example. And what I think is really nice is that this graphic here shows you the weight of the vehicle, the range of the vehicle, and there's this beautiful synergy between large vehicles, whether those are watercraft, buses, coaches, and airplanes, meaning that you can probably develop the same power plant technology to service all of those different sectors. And in the case of this report, which came out of the EU, that technology is fuel cell technology, which obviously is what we're focused on at our company. Now I will say, people love to do electrification projects, and they almost always start with batteries. You wanna know why? Batteries are easy. You buy one off the shelf, you stick it in, you wire it up, there it goes. But that's the simple solution, it's not the smart solution. So the smart solution is to do something which is scalable, something which is more effective, something which can evolve into a more ubiquitous energy storage solution, and it's more difficult, which is why I use the JFK quote, which is that we go to the moon not because it's easy, but because it's hard, right? So in this sense, you want to come up with a good solution. Don't waste your time on something which isn't going to work. Focus on developing the technology which will actually solve the problem, which might take you longer to get there, but it'll be the right solution in the end. So you can't cut corners. I don't know if this will work, but I'll try. This is a fun video that we made of my company. So let's see. I can probably play it from, I can just play it from here maybe.
I'm
Working before.
Professor of Astronautics and founder of Technicolor.
I can hear it, but it's just not showing it. I don't know where it is. Yeah, it's just not showing it. It's okay. I think in the interest of time. Yeah, I don't know how to do that. It just doesn't play up there. It's something else with the file. I don't know. I've had this problem before from playing it in PowerPoint. It's okay. I'm not going to waste time with it. If we can figure it out at the end, we'll do that then. Yeah. So it's just a fun video that I made. We played it at Oshkosh, and I have a lot of friends who work in the Hollywood in the TV space, so they produce this video. I'm trying to like to share it. But ultimately, hydrogen fuel cell, developed for the space program as fuel cells for energy storage, is a great fit for electric propulsion on vehicle technologies. And in addition to being carbon emission free, you know what else is great about electric vehicles? They're super quiet. The horrible noise signature that you hear from cars and buses and trucks, it's gone when you have an electric vehicle. I think it's actually still playing in the background. I have to stop it. It was just playing in the background. I'll just play it again from here. Nope, it was just playing in the background. So reduced noise signature is also a big deal, right? Because if you live in a city environment, you have to deal with those noises, which is super annoying. And I, as an electric vehicle owner, does anyone here own an electric vehicle? Or you've probably been on the bus, okay. The maintenance costs are really low, right? Because you no longer have combustion, which means you no longer have to do all the traditional maintenance associated with oil changes. And when you look at an engineering perspective from how a technology wears, the higher the temperature, the more moving parts, the faster those parts move, like higher RPMs, the more degradation mechanisms there are. So when you have a fuel cell or a battery, which is low temperature, relatively speaking, no moving parts, your maintenance costs are significantly reduced, which is great, right? Puts people who maintain cars perhaps out of business a little bit. Same thing with airplanes. But at the end of the day, if it's going to cost you less to own this thing and operate this thing, you'll be more likely to use it. And operations costs, right? If you were an airline operator, if you were a bus transit operator, you want to reduce your operations costs to make it more ubiquitous at the end of the day. So it's a great solution. And then when we think about it in the case of flight, electric propulsion, well, Chintamani, Dr. Pai is already using it with his drones, right? Those operate off of batteries. But batteries can't be used in aircraft because they're too heavy. But when we think about the first use case for a small airplane, general aviation airplane, that could run off of a fuel cell, which is what we're working on with my company. Then rotorcraft, which are used for emergency response, disaster relief, taking people to the hospital, moving around cargo. Something which I think is of interest to the Indian community in general in urban environments, urban air mobility. Electric vertical takeoff and landing platforms can also use hydrogen fuel cell technology. And then as you build up the technology, you can get to regional aircraft, and then eventually you can get to larger, cargo type of planes. So those are kind of like the evolutionary use cases for electric flight. But now I talk about the challenges, right? So the big challenge with hydrogen is how you store it. So in this graphic here, we're looking at volumetric energy density and then mass energy density. And I wanted to point out here, this little green dot here is the lithium-ion battery. It is the least efficient way to store energy in both volume and mass. So this is something that's really important. Most people don't know this. It is a terrible solution for storing energy. Now, hydrogen is fantastic from a gravimetric density perspective because of that high energy per unit mass, but it's really bad volumetrically because it's a low density gas. So you have to store it either as a high pressure gas, like I have in my car. It's stored at 700 bar, 10,000 psi, or it can be stored as a liquid, which is how it's done for launch vehicle applications. It's the ultimate solution, more complicated once again, but also doesn't require as high pressure as in the high pressure scenarios. It actually has a much lower tankage mass, hence why it's used that way for launch vehicles. Now, when you think about it from a specific energy perspective, which is over here, as you need to go longer and longer in your flight, you end up having to store more energy. So that's the function of your cruise time. For batteries, you want more energy, you have to keep on adding batteries, right? So your specific energy basically stays the same. If you have a fuel cell technology and you're carrying your hydrogen as fuel on board, now you only pay once for the mass of the fuel cell and you carry the rest of the mass in the form of fuel. So you get much better specific energy as you require more stored energy. Now when you do it as a liquid versus a gas, it's even better. So you end up getting to 10 times the specific energy with a liquid hydrogen fuel cell system as compared to the battery equivalent. So that's kind of the huge argument behind fuel cell technology is how if you want to store more energy because you want to carry more payload because you want to go longer distances, it's the way to go. And just in terms of the use cases that we're looking at, we're looking at aviation primarily because that was my interest in founding the company. But you can do it with small aircraft. That's our aircraft at the top. It's a Piper Archer. It can be used in a helicopter. It can be used in vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, or it could be used for cargo planes. And cargo planes are used all over the world in places where they don't have traditional, asphalt runways, and so it's actually a good fit as well. And I won't go into too much detail, but I think it's interesting if you don't know much about the fuel cell technology, how it works. I would argue it's pretty straightforward in terms of its principal operation. This is a low temperature polymer exchange membrane fuel cell. So you have hydrogen in the form of gaseous hydrogen, an H2 molecule, which comes in through the anode, and it flows through something called the gas distribution network. As it goes through that gas distribution network, it's a tortuous flow path, right? A little bit of pressure drop in there. It is catalyzed by the presence of a little bit of rare minerals. Sometimes it's platinum, sometimes it's a combination of platinum, bolt, and cobalt, which then splits up the hydrogen gas into hydrogen ions. So you can think of a hydrogen fuel cell as like a hydrogen ion battery. Those hydrogen ions then pass through a membrane, a polymer membrane, and then recombine with oxygen, which comes from the air on the other side. So this is basically an air-breathing propulsion system taking in air from the ambient environment. What this means in the case of aircraft, however, is as you go up in altitude, there's less oxygen present, right, because the density of air goes down, which means you have to compress it. So a fuel cell implementation usually typically requires a turbocharger, so a piece of turbo machinery to compress the air to get more oxygen to meet your stoichiometric ratio requirements for the hydrogen interaction. But when the air comes in and the oxygen is also catalyzed, it combines with the hydrogen ions that pass through the membrane to produce liquid water. So the only output of a fuel cell is liquid water. And it's relatively low temperature water because that's the maximum temperature that you can operate one of these systems at, otherwise the membrane gets damaged. So it has all kinds of good applications to the fact that it's low temperature because it doesn't obviously experience a lot of wear mechanisms, but it's challenging from a thermal perspective. Anybody mechanical engineer students in the room? One or two, okay, several. So from a thermal perspective, it's challenging to mitigate because you don't get to exhaust a lot of the hot temperature that you normally do in the combustion process, which means you've got to have like a ram air heat exchanger and fans and things like that. So there is an engineering challenge associated with thermal management, but it's not the end of the world. It's one that we've already mitigated with our solution. But a very simple system, and when you split up the hydrogen gas into hydrogen ions, the electrons that are released in that process flow in a circuit around the side, and that basically is what gives you your electricity. And so at my company, we're developing a from-scratch fuel cell that is very mass and volume efficient compared to what's already out there in the market, and more durable because we've selected materials to make it more durable for the high peak power aviation implementations. But this is a great graphic which I think does a great job of describing it. Now, I don't think this little video is going to work either because the other one didn't, but it's okay. Not missing much. But this was just to show you how we actually make the membranes from scratch. So we have a solution of material that we basically turn into a sludge. We swipe it to make a piece of plastic that looks like plastic wrap that you put over your food. Not quite the same, but it looks the same. And that is the electrolyte through which the hydrogen ions pass through. So we do this from scratch in the laboratory, but then we also have a partner that we work with so that we can do it at scale for manufacturing implementation of it. But very much a material science problem, which I think is also pretty interesting. What we're developing is a power plant, which could go into an aircraft, but we're also proposing it for buses, for trucks, as well as for marine applications. And this is what you can see here. So one of the skill sets that you use a lot in the engineering world is CAD, structural design, thermal design, and fluid analysis. We do all of that in the development of our system, and most of it is actually done by very young engineers just out of school too. So it isn't people with decades of experience necessarily who do the bulk of our analytical work and our design work. It's actually people who just graduated from school, which is great because yeah, it works out really well if you're running a company. And then it gives you an idea of our facility. We are a startup, which means that we don't have a lot of money, but we do have huge product based on the amount of money that we're working with. So we have a great test facility where we're developing the fuel cell. You can see us assembling and testing it here. And then we also have our aircraft that we're retrofitting with our technology, which will fly a little bit later this year. And then a lot of our company are also pilots, so we're going to fly our own airplane, which is kind of exciting. So we don't have to go and purchase a pilot, we can fly the airplane ourselves, because it's pretty straightforward to fly one of these airplanes with an electric propulsion system from the pilot's perspective. It's exactly the same. You're just putting between 0 to 100% power. And we started off with this much smaller aircraft because it's easier to implement. And for those of you who've never flown in a small plane, they're kind of like a glider. So if you lose your engine for some reason, like you lose engine power, you have sufficient altitude margin to put it down. And when you train to become a commercial pilot, you basically learn how to land the plane without the engine in a really tight, in a really difficult scenario. So, and even in the worst case scenario where you have a problem, you'll be able to land it just fine. So it's not that difficult of a thing to do. And our first aircraft, we called it Protium, right? Because it's just a play on words in terms of isotopes of hydrogen. We're going to be flying in Los Angeles, actually out in the desert. That's where our hangar is based. And then we'll try and get to up to 1,000 kilometers range, which is a great regional flight distance, for example. And I probably won't say too much more on this, but ultimately, as an engineer, your job is to make something more efficient. Your job is to make it way less, and your job is to make it more cost effective. Sometimes those things you might think are in competition, and they are, but with innovation, you can come up with solutions which answer all three of those questions. But you have to do all three, or you're going to end up having something which isn't going to be useful to your end-use customer. And so that's what we did with our power plant, so that we can fit it within the nose of an aircraft. And just this graphic on the right here is basically showing you something which is an efficiency curve called the polarization curve, which shows you the efficiency of our system versus the state-of-the-art system. So you can see how, as an engineer working in the field, you're doing design work, you're doing modeling and simulation, you're showing how you get those improvements with your new approach to give a new product which can be used in the real world. And that's what engineering is all about, I would argue. And it takes a whole suite of engineers to make this happen, not just one type. We also have a huge emphasis on software development, for example, because these types of systems can't run open loop. They have to be run closed loop so that you can keep the air compressor safe, so you can ensure you get the right stoichiometric ratio as you're changing your altitude. So very complex software development as well. So that's what I love about this field, is that you have to work with everybody. It is very multidisciplinary, which I think makes it more exciting because we all learn from each other at the end of the day, which I like, because I'm always learning, as everybody should. Let's see. So moving on to the last area, which I think is an important one, because there are a lot of opportunities in this space now, certainly in the United States, and I think it's the case in India as well, is spaceflight. And so I mentioned at the outset of the talk that there's a real push for space tourism. I don't think it's necessarily a good thing, but as a result of it, there's a lot more launch vehicle companies who now are able to operate their launch vehicles more cost effectively. In the case of the Blue Origin one, this one can't go orbital, it only goes suborbital, but it is operated on hydrogen, right? So at least it doesn't have the CO2 output the SpaceX system has and the Virgin Galactic system has, which is the dirtiest of all of them. So they are working on the next generation one, which can go orbital. And for those of you who have Amazon Prime memberships, your Amazon Prime memberships are going to fund this. So because Jeff Bezos' mission in life wasn't to make Amazon, it was to make this. Because I think he personally wants to, do off-world manufacturing in space, on the moon, and take that all off of the Earth. You can debate whether or not that's a good idea or that makes sense separately. But nevertheless, he has this company where our lead of systems and software, we actually pulled her out of Blue Origin to come work for us, which is great. She's a former student of mine. But you can see how this space program technology is now moving into the commercial space, ultimately to facilitate something, whether it's tourism or off-world manufacturing, I'm not sure, but Bezos has infinite amount of money because everybody has Amazon Prime. So you gotta figure out whether or not that's something you support or not. Now, there's more than one option, right? There's also Boeing, a more traditional company, right? Been around for a lot longer. They too are developing hydrogen-powered launch vehicle and access to space with their Starliner. Unfortunately, it is marred by software development issues. And Boeing as a company is huge, and it doesn't operate as efficiently as SpaceX does, which is still a big company, but not as big as Boeing. And as a result, they've been struggling, to get this thing going. And of course, Indian launch vehicle development, I think, also has liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen capabilities. So I can see the Indian launch vehicle development being a prime competitor to SpaceX more so than anybody else, because the Indian launch vehicle development also has the cost efficiency associated with it that SpaceX does. Probably even more so when you look at the cost that it took to develop the Mars mission, the Mars orbiter mission, for example. So now, from an engineering perspective, if you can come up with these really cost efficient, high performance solutions, you will be really competitive and could conceivably take over, other companies, like the SpaceXs of the world, for example. So that's something to think about. So, hydrogen-powered flight is what you want for the space program to get you from point A to point B, to expand into the stars, as well as to do off-world manufacturing, potentially. And it is much better to do it off of hydrogen and oxygen from a emissions perspective as well. So once again, tied to hydrogen technologies from the space program. So now another area which I'll kind of wrap up with, which I think India has a big interest in the sector too, right? Because there's lots of vegetarians in India, is that one of the biggest contributors to climate, greenhouse gas emissions is actually agriculture. So if you shift to a agrarian, basically plant-based diets, then you actually reduce a lot of carbon emissions. So when you look to how the first human beings are going to live on the surface of Mars, they're not going to be eating meat, right? They're only going to be eating vegetables, and they're probably going to be eating engineered plant-based proteins, for example, like Beyond Burger and stuff like that, if we cover in the United States. So growing food on future Mars bases, it will all be, that's what you'll eat. You'll only eat vegetables. Not a big deal for Indian culture, right? Because there's already plenty of vegetarian options here, but might be a bit of an issue for European and American culture, potentially, I don't know. But one of the technologies here to facilitate this is genetically engineered food to make it more efficient. And the other byproduct of growing plants is that not only do they suck in CO2, which is great from a carbon emissions control perspective, but they also release oxygen. So you can use the plants to create more oxygen for your future habitat. So it's this great closed loop cycle to think about it. And as an aside, one of the best ways to mitigate climate change is to actually grow more trees. Trees are one of the best carbon sinks that are out there. It's one of the smartest, simplest solutions that exist, actually. So there is a big push for reforestation, which is really important. So growing more trees, specifically in the equatorial region of the Earth, can help suck more CO2 out of the atmosphere. So, you know, everything is interconnected at the end of the day. And there's already, oh, this one went past. There's already been a demonstration of how you would grow plants in space on the International Space Station. This is called the Veggie Habitat. I did a lot of work with the International Space Station a couple of years ago, so I got to see all the different experiments. And so you're able to grow like a lettuce in an environment where there is no soil, and you're just giving it light, you're just giving it nutrients, and it's growing in zero gravity. The bad news is that plants do require gravity to grow efficiently. They need to know which way is up and which way is down. So all the poor lettuces that have been grown on the space station look terrible because they didn't know which way to go. But the good news is that you're doing it on the moon, you're doing it on Mars, you do have gravity vectors that will help those plants. So that then asks the question of, well, how are human beings going to develop in a microgravity environment? Like as in the womb. I don't know. We haven't figured that one out yet. Now, electric vehicles, guess what the first probably electric car was? The moon buggy, right, from the Apollo program. So electric vehicles have always existed for the space program, right, because you don't have access to gas on the surface of another planet or the moon, so you always have to make the electric vehicles. So I would also argue that electric vehicles and autonomy associated with driving these electric vehicles did come from the space program and then made its way back here to Earth, which is another kind of interesting aside. And then I got to spend a lot of time at NASA Johnson in my last job, and they are actually developing this particular one for Mars and lunar applications, where you would either be in a spacesuit or they would put a capsule over it, because otherwise you'd be in trouble, because there's no air on either of those bodies. But we had a lot of fun messing around with that one. And then I think finally, where I think the Space Program does a really good job, because all of the engineering is centered around efficiency, is in situ resource utilization. And what this means, ISRU is the term people like to say for it, the acronym, is that living off the land. Well, human beings have always had to do that, right? Living off the land. And that means getting your power from the sun with solar panels. You know, you can actually protect yourself from the radiation environment of on the surface of the moon, on the surface of Mars, by going subterranean or creating habitats made with the local soil from Mars or for the moon, getting water, extracting water from the subsurface. You could do that on the moon, as we now know. You could also do that on Mars, as we now know. And then, although I wouldn't be a fan of it for here, on Earth purposes, you could make your own rocket fuel on Mars, either by taking the CO2 to make methane with hydrogen, or simply using liquid hydrogen, liquid oxygen, which I think is the better solution, right? Because you can at least get the oxygen part from the CO2. And then extremophiles, which as I mentioned before, which is the plants that exist on the surface. So what this really means, though, is that you can have green technologies to connect Earth and ultimately connect the solar system to other places in the solar system, right? So with the development of clean technologies such as hydrogen, production of hydrogen, as well as hydrogen fuel cell technologies, as well as combusting hydrogen launch vehicles, you can have carbon emission-free ways to get around the solar system, ironically. And another area which is of interest to me, because it was my PhD research, is electric propulsion for spacecraft. You could actually use basically accelerators in space to get you from point A to point B, right? So you do some onboard assembly, and you have power from your solar array in space, and then you have your spacecraft, which is accelerated with a linear electric motor, basically, to get you up to whatever delta V you're trying to achieve. So there are ways to actually be more energy efficient in space and be green in that way, which I think is really important. So space technologies do have applications here for the marine sector, for the Hyperloop, potentially for jet aircraft, but that might require slightly different technology, and of course robotic vehicles, and eventually human Mars exploration. So I think we're probably out of time, so now I can take questions. Thank you. Yeah, I'm happy to answer questions on anything, that is of interest to you.
Dr. Anita, thank you for a fascinating talk. I've been following you on Facebook for years, and my dream has come true today. I couldn't sleep the whole night, then I thought I will listen to you in person. So you are the greatest protagonist of sustainable technologies on the earth today. Congratulations. One of the challenges which the earth faces on the electrical vehicle battery movement is the charge to weight ratio. The lithium batteries are deterrent on the aircraft because of that ratio, adverse ratio. So what do you think is the ratio for hydrogen fuel cells as compared to lithium batteries, and would that be sustainable for planes? Because at the moment, since it's in a development stage, what I think is that the hydrogen turbo propulsion seems to be the alternative at the moment because of the challenge of the liquid hydrogen to carry on the airplanes. Your comments on this?
So the advantage is a function of how much stored energy you need. So that was the purpose of the graphic, is that if you were to fly for 5 hours, which is a pretty typical profile, you're looking at 10 times improvement over batteries if you store the hydrogen as a liquid. So hydrogen storage as a liquid, people are afraid of it because they're not used to it, but hydrogen stored as a liquid on the ground all the time. You can either do it with a certain type of insulation or you can do it with a vacuum jacketed dewar. So in my opinion, it's actually much easier to store it as a liquid than it is as a gaseous. And you also get much better improvement because of the mass fraction of the tanks. So it is very feasible. We already have a design that gives you the identical range and payload of a Piper Archer going with liquid hydrogen tanks with a fuel cell as you get from the combustion system. It becomes an easier problem as the aircraft gets larger because then you've got more real estate to work with and you actually have more margin to work with. But right now, fuel cell technology is still pretty heavy. So if you were to use the current off-the-shelf fuel cell technology, you're looking at 3 times heavier versus combustion, but still much lighter than the batteries. Yeah, so it does work. We've already shown that it works. We've already closed it for small aircraft, which means it will work for larger aircraft. But there are many innovations that have to happen. You do have to lightweight the fuel cell, so that means choosing different materials. You do want it to operate it more efficiently. So the automotive systems are designed for really low power because when you have a car, you have like an acceleration spike, right? Which means you need a peak power a lot higher than what your cruise power is, but it's being optimized for cruise so that when you run it at high power, it's actually running very inefficiently. That's just how it's designed because it makes sense for them. For the automotive application, for the trucking application, and for the marine application, you're actually cruising at much higher powers, so your peak to cruise ratio is different, which is the reason why it requires a custom design system. But I would argue it absolutely does work. That's where we're working on. I wish I could show the video, but I can share that on social media or something like that. But yeah, that's actually our approach. But you can't necessarily solve the regional jet problem tomorrow. You can't, it's just not there yet. Like even with a twin turboprop, you can do a demonstration, but it's not going to be a marketable product. But you can solve the smaller aircraft problem, which allows you with each generation of the technology to make it more efficient to solve the larger aircraft problem. And when you look at the bulk of emissions from the heavy-duty transport sector, they don't come from aviation. They come from buses, they come from trucks, they come from rail. So you can actually do so much to decarbonize, remove carbon emissions as well as particulate emissions from those sectors using this technology, which would dramatically improve the air quality here in India, for example, as well as around the world. So it is a great evolutionary technology because you can use it tomorrow in your ground vehicles and your marine vehicles, and you can use it in like 3 to 5 years in smaller aircraft, moving your way up.
Thank you. And ma'am, the second part of the question was regarding the Hyperloop. The Hyperloop is a very promising area and the one which you worked as your first project with Virgin. But I'm a little surprised that big companies are not betting on this being such a highly productive technology in the sense of efficiencies. And is the challenge because of the levitation? It requires superconductivity and that requires liquid nitrogen. Is that an issue?
In my opinion, no. I think the challenge is that it requires a much higher infrastructure cost because not only do you have to just build the track, you also have to build the structure, right? You have to build that superstructure. And so anybody who is a company or in this business has zero experience with building vacuum technology or vacuum sealed structure, right? That nobody has that ability, right? Except for people who make vacuum chambers, and those are usually not made out of like concrete. So I think the challenge is that the people who are in the infrastructure space don't understand it, don't have any familiarity with it, therefore it's driving up the cost because they're costing it the way they would cost anything else. And then a government customer sees, oh, my traditional contractors don't want to do this because they don't understand it, and then they get nervous too. So I think the reality is it's because the cost has to come down before it comes worthwhile. And it isn't, so the magnets, from a linear electric propulsion perspective, it's not an issue. It's actually easier than maglev, right? So if you could do maglev, you could do the Hyperloop, because a lot of the complexity of maglev is the fact that that you're in an environment where you're getting like turbulence and all that kind of stuff, so it actually makes it more difficult to maintain your track alignment. In the vacuum system, it's actually easier to maintain those alignments, but I think it's more the infrastructure cost because of the vacuum jacketed troop structure, which people just don't know. And even our demonstration wasn't even a kilometer, right? It was only, half a kilometer, right? So that shows you some stuff, but even in that length, you see changes, right, because of the temperature, diurnal variations, earthquakes, things like that. So there's a lot of technical issues that have to be de-risked to convince the ultimate customer, which is the government, that will do this. And so my guess is it's more likely that it would happen in the Middle East first, because they don't need to do as long of a distance. They've got, I would say, a little bit more, they do certainly have large temperature variations, but they don't have the same kind of ground variations with earthquakes that we would get in the US, for example, or places like, in Europe where you have more sedimentation of the ground. So I think it's just because the technology hasn't been de-risked, and if you're choosing between a traditional rail, high-speed rail, and the Hyperloop, and these two exist, and you know what the risk is, and this one doesn't, and you're having to spend $100 billion, you might go with lower risk technology. $1 billion, right? So your cost risk is a lot less.
So the airplane industry would push it back still further.
Well, the Airbus is doing a lot of work in the combustion area, but that's because Airbus and Boeing are not, their business model isn't propeller-driven aircraft, their business model is jet aircraft. And so for jet aircraft, because they're flying at high altitudes, it actually might make more sense to do hydrogen combustion. So you have to have onboard liquid oxygen storage, for example, if you were to do fuel cell technology for high altitude. But when you look at CO2 emissions from the aviation space, the bulk of it comes from regional travel, because those aircraft are old aircraft, they're inefficient, they are propeller driven, so it's actually a really good fit for fuel cell technologies to go in, take the regional marketplace, turn it, decarbonize it, worry about the transoceanic stuff later, because that represents a really tiny bit of CO2 compared to everything else, like compared to the regional market, compared to trucking, compared to buses. So you don't have to solve the jet tomorrow, right? You can solve all these other problems first, which would make far more of a dent in emissions anyway. But I think people tend to focus on like the super interesting isn't the right word, but I hate to use the word sexy problem, right? Let's just do supersonic flight. Why? Do we need it? No. Right? And so people put tons of money into it. What happens? The companies go bust because nobody wants to buy their aircraft, because who cares? Why do you need supersonic flight? You don't, right? Tomorrow. And so it's an interesting debate of what projects get funded versus what projects should get funded.
And what happened to your VTOL, your pet project?
Which one?
VTOL, vertical takeoff.
Oh, so I think I decided that wasn't a good evolutionary solution because you can't use batteries. And so that's why I created this company. One of the things we did was we actually proposed it to a government customer for vertical takeoff and landing. But I think that isn't necessary to solve the pressing challenge of decarbonizing existing forms of transport. So
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. As we know that hydrogen is like a very combustible element, then what are the safety measures that we take in terms of hydrogen fuel cells?
So the irony is that in an aviation application, hydrogen could be safer than existing Jet A. And the reason for that is that you can choose, if you had an engine out scenario or fuel cell out scenario, you could choose to vent all your hydrogen overboard, and when you landed, you would have a rough landing, but you wouldn't have an explosion. Whereas if you have an engine out scenario on a Jet A crewed aircraft, you've got a bomb that's going to go and land at your airport. So in many instances, if you're worried about combustibility, you should be worried about combustibility with gasoline as you should with hydrogen. The other advantage of hydrogen, because it's a really small molecule, when it leaks, it just diffuses rapidly. Whereas with gasoline, when it leaks, it actually pools around on the ground. So there's many, I know all about the safety arguments behind this. So in many ways, gasoline or hydrocarbons are even worse than hydrogen. That being said, you always have to mitigate leaks. You always have to mitigate the chance for ignitions, right? So it also, it's hypergolic, right? It requires, you have to have an ignition source, basically, to be able to combust it to begin with. And then when you look at the oxygen concentration that's required to create that reaction, it also doesn't happen automatically. So you'd have to be in an enclosed space where you have a leak. And so there are ways to implement and mitigate that from an engineering perspective. But if you're worried about that for hydrogen, you should also be worried about that for gasoline.
Thank you.
And then the other piece to that, which I think is important, is that because it's already been certified for automotive use, what could be more difficult than being able to drive your car in the middle of a high traffic area like Los Angeles, get into an accident, and not hurt people, right? So if you can design an engineering solution against that failure scenario, it's actually easier in the aircraft scenario because you don't have the propensity for collisions in a high population density area as you do with automotive. So automotive is actually the most difficult case to solve from a safety perspective. So the fact that that's been done, thank goodness, by the car companies from Japan, that shows like proof of concept wise that easily it can be done for the aircraft application.
One more question from my side. Actually, I have two questions. One question related to his question. Which hydrogen is more inflammable? It's a liquid form or it's gaseous form?
So I think from an energy density perspective, when it's stored as a liquid, it's got more energy there. So it would give you more energy per unit volume than you would get from the gaseous perspective. So from a volumetric perspective, the liquid would be the case for sure. But the safety protocols that you have to implement in the liquid form and the gaseous form still exist in terms of keeping your leak rates down. And when you use the hydrogen in a fuel cell, you're not using it as liquid, you are using it as gas. So it wants to boil off naturally, right, because it's cryogen. So that boil off process is actually your fuel delivery process. So then you're dealing with the leaks primarily in the same form, which is the gaseous form. So liquid hydrogen storage tanks are nothing new. They're used all the time for industrial applications. So the liquid medium only exists in those tanks. So everything else would be gaseous.
And in connection to the same question, ma'am, what I understood from the presentation, you showed a generation of the hydrogen gas, and then the same hydrogen gas is used in the fuel cell. Now my question is, are they both in the close proximity, or there is some interconnect which is connecting the generation of the hydrogen and utilization of the hydrogen in the fuel cell?
Oh, yeah, sorry, they're not connected at all. So like, in that case, I was just showing you the graphic of how you go from renewable energy to making it, to storing it, to using it. But right now, if you produce it, it would be stored at an airport in a dewar, and then you would taxi your plane over to it, make the connection and fuel. And so right now with my car, I drive to the gas station, and at some gas stations there's a hydrogen pump. So here's the gas pump, the hydrogen pump is right next to it, right? So we've got highly combustible things in the environment together. I put on a quick disconnect, and then it uses 3 stages of compression to compress the gas into the car. So how you fuel your hydrogen vehicle is exactly the same as how you fuel your gasoline vehicle. But instead of it being a pump handle that looks like this, it's a pump handle that looks like that. So in that sense, it's like, from an end user perspective, there's very little difference.
Okay, and one more question. I got to know that you are an ex-NASA scientist. It would be great if you share a few of your experiences from the NASA.
Oh, sure. I mean, I've had many, but I think, I don't know, I mean, they were all really fun projects. My PhD was electric propulsion, so that's how I know a lot about electric propulsion, but for spacecraft applications. So I worked on the Deep Space One mission that went to a comet and an asteroid. My PhD work, so this is a great story for those of you thinking about whether you should do your PhD or not. My PhD thesis design changes actually went into the engine that was built for the Dawn mission, which enabled it to go visit like Vesta and Ceres. So that was kind of exciting. So that was kind of super fun work where actually your research work goes into a spacecraft. And then I worked on the entry descent landing system for the Curiosity rover. I developed like a qualification of a supersonic parachute, and I worked a little bit on the sky crane thing, which landed the rover with the 3 tethers. Lots of experimental work there, and then I worked on the development of an atomic physics facility for the space station. So really fun projects, my NASA projects, but not as much fun as having your own small business, because when you work for NASA, you're one employee and a big pool of people. You've got like tons of layers of management. But when you have your own company or when you're at a startup, you get to do more stuff. You're involved in everything from the testing to the analysis to the fundraising to setting up the facility to making the video. So it's a different type of experience. I got lots of really useful engineering skills from the NASA world, but I think I've leveraged them really well into the startup space. But it's fun. Working for the space program is a lot of fun. And I had a lot of like fun opportunities there, but I'm happier now being independent, being able to raise my own money for research projects. So yeah, that I think it kind of depends upon your personality, but my personality is one where I just do better being more in control of the project than just being part of a larger team. But it was really fun to work on those things, and I got skills that I wouldn't have gotten outside of it. And ironically, I say this about my undergraduate days, every single project that I worked in doing undergraduate research developing coatings for like ceramic coatings, all the way to how parachutes are sewn, all the way to how to set up gas distribution networks. I have used every single one of those skills in my company in one way or another. So whatever you do in life, you probably will do it again and use it to help you in your next role. So it's kind of funny how everything comes full circle at the end.
Students first. Please allow students to ask.
Hello ma'am, if H2 is that much of an efficient energy source, why hasn't it been mainstreamed yet? I mean, does it, why the half of the world is using dirtiest energy sources ever?
Oh.
Does it have something to do with storage, or is it something else?
So I think one, it comes back to ease, right? So people have been drilling for oil for a long time now, right? And there's a lot of money to be made by, if you are a little producer, putting it into a vehicle. It's storable, so something which is a room temperature storable propellant is easy to use, therefore people are more likely to use it. Is it the most energy efficient? No. Is it easier to use? Yes, right? So you have to think about the environmental impact, right? So if burning diesel is cheap and easy to use, but it's destroying your environment and destroying people's health, is that a good thing? So I think public consciousness has changed over time. So another great example would be, I don't know when it was, hundreds and hundreds of years ago in the United Kingdom, the River Thames, the water quality was like so bad, the air quality was so bad that everything turned black. Then finally someone's like, we're destroying our river, maybe we should do something about it and stop polluting. So I think there are cultural changes where people start to take responsibility, which may be more expensive in the short run, but in the long run it ends up actually saving you a lot of money. So I think the reason why people go for the cheap storables, even on launch vehicles, because it's easy, it's cheap, it's not as difficult. But is it the best solution from an energy efficiency perspective? Is it the best efficiency solution from an emissions perspective? No. And so that's why. And I think ultimately, people oftentimes do take the easy way out, and there's a cost to doing that, right? In this case, there's an environmental cost. But I mean, mathematically, it is what it is, right? Hydrogen has a lot more energy per unit mass, and storage is a challenge, but it's also a challenge which has already been mitigated. It just has to be mitigated for these different types of vehicles.
But why aren't efforts made on the institutional level?
Why aren't they made on the institutional level?
Yes.
Oh, well, they are being. So I would say the European Union has put in billions of dollars to develop green hydrogen, like literally, I think probably like close to $200 billion, and even the U.S. government is now doing that. But not to be negative, but you're a young person, so you're not, you don't know everything about how the world works yet. There's a lot of politics involved, right? So in the United States, for example, for many, many years, the oil industry controlled everything, right? So why would the oil industry want some new technology to put them out of business, right? That's ultimately the reason why sometimes not the right decisions are made, but the easy decision is made, or somebody's making money off of it. So as an engineer, I feel like we're all very altruistic, and we're like, but this seems like a good solution, why aren't we doing it? Because sadly, we're not the ones making these kinds of decisions in governments. We should be, I think. But I think that's part of it. So it's good to ask those questions, because you're like, wait a minute, this seems illogical. Most people do not operate logically, unfortunately. But I think what we're seeing now with climate change is centuries and centuries of people making terrible decisions, catching up with my generation, your generation, which is only going to hurt the next generation to come. So it is good to think logically, it is good to make decisions based off the right technical answer, and it's good to ask that question, because we have to make the right decision. So maybe something else will come along, which is an even better solution, and we should shift to that, right? But sticking with what we are sticking with, which is hydrocarbons, is the worst decision that we can make, right? Because it's polluting the atmosphere. And I think it's not just this, though. I would say the other thing, too, is we can make personal choices, right? So we should make personal choices to take public transportation, to walk, to ride our bicycle. We don't all need to own individual cars, right? So there are personal decisions that we make along the same lines.
Thank you.
So ma'am, I have a question that in electric vehicles, whenever there is electric propulsion, it is quite inefficient in delivering peak power, or power density is quite low for the available sources which we have right now. So wouldn't it be a better bet to invest in hydrogen combustion led propulsions than hydrogen like EV propulsions, electric propulsions?
Well, so in reality, that's actually not true, right? So if you take a look at the polarization curve for a fuel cell, you get really good efficiency where you need peak power. And you can choose to size the fuel cell where you can choose to size it where you're getting like 47% efficiency, right? So combustion process is the least efficient process. So like a diesel engine at low powers can be something like, I don't know, 20% efficient or even less than 20% efficient. So that's not actually true. So you can design your electric propulsion system with a fuel cell to be optimized where when you look at optimization, you also have to look at how much time am I spending at peak power, how much time am I spending at cruise, and then you would pick on the efficiency curve where you want that to be. But you can play those optimization games more easily with an electric propulsion system than you can with a combustion system. But combustion is actually the least efficient way to do it, right? It's just a fact, right? So you're never going to operate your car at the point on its efficiency curve and just stay there. That's never going to happen, right? So you're always going to be operating all over the place, and you're horribly inefficient as a result.
Ma'am, but wouldn't it be better in adapting? Like we have internal combustion engines right now, and if we shift towards hydrogen combustion engines, so it will be a smoother variation from directly shifting towards.
Well, not necessarily, right? Because you still have to store the hydrogen on the vehicle. So if you're already investing in the storage technology, if you're already investing in the delivery technology, you're already investing in the infrastructure, why not invest in a more efficient way to use the hydrogen, right? It doesn't make sense to stop there, right? So there may be places where combustion makes sense for high altitude aircraft, but the other negative of combusting hydrogen is that it has a high temperature exhaust, which means it's now going to create NOx emissions, and NOx emissions are a terrible greenhouse gas. So combustion in general isn't a good solution because you're still creating, so instead of putting out CO2, you're now heating up nitrogen in the atmosphere, which is then combining with oxygen to create NOx, which also is a greenhouse gas, so it doesn't solve that problem, unfortunately. So people are only starting to pay attention to that now, and then when you release those emissions in the upper atmosphere, it has an even worse effect on the radiative heating problem from climate change. So that's why, in general, combustion is just not a good process. It's an inefficient process to get. If what you're looking for is mechanical, translated into mechanical energy, it's not the best way to do it. And just because there's a vendor who makes a piston or who makes a turbine, those people need to get with the program and start making something else as well, right? So there's no reason why they couldn't. And then from an end user perspective, but it costs a lot of money to maintain a combustion engine. It's not cheap, right? Because you have revolutions per minute, really high temperatures, seals are wearing away, and so you have to use oil in the process for lubricants. So there's all these other aspects to it as well. So there's many inefficiencies associated with it. It's kind of an antiquated technology, basically. It's like a horse and carriage. We're not using them as much as we used to.
So ma'am, what is the life of a hydrogen fuel cell? It needs to be replaced after some time. So how does the cost fare in that case as compared to traditional engines?
So it's a difficult question for me to answer in the context of aircraft because we don't have any life test data. But if we use the number of hours that the automotive application is designed for, it's basically designed for the life of the vehicle. Right, so you're going to use it for at least a decade. And then when you put that into the aviation space, the FAA or the equivalent aviation regulatory body mandates that you have to replace your power plant for a combustion power plant after a certain number of hours, typically somewhere between 1,000 to 3,000 hours. So you have to go in and replace it anyway. And so we're designing our system to cost less than that, and also to give you about 1.5 times that from a lifetime perspective. So that will save you money too. Because we don't have the data collected yet, we can't say definitively it's this, right? And when you look at the way the fuel cell degrades, it degrades in a completely different way than you get with a combustion engine where you do a compression check on the cylinder, you see that the compression is no longer being held. Now you're at a point where you're flying where the engine could fail on you at any moment in time. A fuel cell behaves very, very differently because it's got a membrane and you get reduced performance over time and you can kind of see that degradation. But you should be able to achieve longer times between overhaul the fuel cell system as compared to the combustion equivalent. But it depends on how you design it and use it. They're all engineering requirements at the end of the day.
Yes, thank you.
Sure.
Good afternoon to you, ma'am. So I have a series of 4 questions. So, like, short questions. So Hyperloop safety, the Hyperloop currently is constructed overground and by connecting a series of pipes, if you say. So if one of those pipes gets penetrated by, let's say, a terrorist attack or something, it can create a depressurized environment. So why not construct it underground? I mean, I have to guess it's because of maintenance purposes since it's in a development stage. But still, its safety is a concern, right? Because it's using highly pressurized environment. Sorry, highly depressurized environment.
Yeah, so we actually did look into that, and so you can have when you apply a requirement like that, you have to apply it to everything, not just the Hyperloop, right? So for that argument, then all trains should be underground because otherwise a terrorist attack can come, which can derail a train and then kill everybody on the train, right? So logically, if you're going to say for the Hyperloop you should do that, you should do it for every train. So that isn't a requirement because nobody has to design for the requirement. Now, that being said, if you have a failure, a loss in depressurization, that ends up, we actually looked at this, that ends up creating a pressure discontinuity, which is a shock wave. And so you can actually take a look at what force the vehicle would experience because of the presence of that shock wave, and then based off of that, like how many G's would it experience, and then as a result, like how could people inside get damaged. So the irony is Hyperloop also is very different implementation from a train where all the cars are connected to each other. In a Hyperloop, very few cars are connected to each other, so if you have the failure of one, it doesn't cascade into the failure of others. So when you look at the failure requirement for rail, it's number of deaths per passenger kilometer. Because the vehicles are much smaller, it's a very different scenario, which in a sense, not that it's safer, but you meet that requirement in a different way more easily. But you can analyze what the loss of pressure is due to a discontinuity, right, due to some thing crashing into it. But you also can create barrier structures so people can't get up to it. So I think the far more likely scenario would be that there's an earthquake. The earthquake results in a structural damage to the tube, and then the tube fails. Then the question is how quickly does it fail? But even that is something you can analyze, design for. You can pick, in California, you have to work to certain earthquake standards because you get earthquakes there, so that you don't have to design to the magnitude 9 on the Richter scale earthquake, because it never happens, right? So you always, when you make decisions like this, the regulations in your government have already thought about that. They say, you need to design to this type of earthquake, to this much margin, and then you design to that. And then probabilistically, then you've weighed the risk of this type of system failing, this type of system failing, this type of system failing. But you never have to design for the impossible of the impossible and the impossible because it isn't logical, I guess.
Thank you, ma'am. So another question is fuel cell power. Sorry. Another question is fuel cell power plants. The main concern of today's people, they want to save time, and that's why the Concorde was made between the British Airways and the French, the French National Airline. So turboprops are not that fast, and people want to are used to getting from one place to another in about 2 hours with jet planes. But turboprops will probably take double the time. It may reduce emissions, but it will take double the time, and the average consumer or the middle class family don't want to save that, right?
Well, the time is based off of how long you're going, right? So if it's a regional flight, you have a certain amount of time you spend on climb, a certain amount of time you spend on descent. Your cruise portion is another portion of that. And you're not half the speed, you're probably 2/3 the speed. So time-wise, it doesn't really make that much of a difference. The other advantage between going to a smaller regional aircraft model is that jet aircraft can only take off on land at really long runways, which means that you can only fly into super big airports. With a smaller aircraft, you can actually land at smaller airports, which then reduces the amount of time to get there, to go through security, to do all of that. So when you think about the time for transportation, you have to think of the door-to-door transit time, not just the fraction that you're actually at cruise, flying at some percentage less than what you would get in a jet aircraft. But for me, I fly really small airplanes, which go really slow. I can get to San Francisco faster in my small airplane to where I want to go than I can in a jet in Southwest, because all these other factors, because I can go fly into Sacramento Executive Airport, get out, get in my car and go, right? So there's many different aspects, many different inefficiencies associated with that model. And then the other thing to realize is not everybody in the world lives next to a beautiful airport with a long runway, right? So being able to, one of the arguments behind urban air mobility is that it gives more connectivity to rural environments where they don't have access to airports or airfields or anything, right? So if you could land on a dirt landing strip, if you could land somewhere out in the middle of nowhere, then you get more accessibility, and you also reduce those people's transit time significantly. So the jet problem only solves a portion of the problem, and it's really best over really long distances, but for regional flights, it usually actually doesn't make that much of a difference, ironically, because of all these other factors. And even that example, like, I typically avoid trying to fly into LAX because it's a huge airport, and I fly into Burbank, which is still a commercial airport, but it takes me, 10 minutes to get through security at Burbank versus it takes me an hour to get through security at LAX. So already, I've made my life a lot easier by choosing to go to the smaller airport. So, good questions though.
I guess we can conclude the question and answer session for in the interest of time. The speaker must be tired. Probably after the end of the program, you can personally meet and ask your question. We can keep a window of some 10 minutes after we conclude the program to answer a few more questions later.
Okay.
So we'll, for the time being, we conclude the Q&A session now. You can continue to ask later after the program.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sen Gupta, for adding valuable insights on quintessential need for the awareness of climate change. It was great to learn about hydrogenesis, hyperloop, hydroplane, and all of that. And I'm pretty sure everyone in the room will make sure that they use their engineering brains to develop something more smart, to develop something more innovative. Now, I would like to call upon Dr. Milind Shah, who is the Head of Department for Electronics and Telecommunications, to present ma'am with a memento. And I would ask Dr. Megha ma'am to present Anita Sen Gupta ma'am for the staff.
Megha ma'am. All came on one side.
And now I would request Dr. Megha Kolekar, Associate Professor at the Department of Electronics and Telecommunication, to propose a vote of thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. I know I stand between you and your lunchtime. But expressing gratitude and appreciation has been our tradition, and I'm extremely privileged to propose this vote of thanks. First and foremost, I would like to express a very warm gratitude to our star speaker for the today, Dr. Anita Sen Gupta, for taking out time, visiting us, visiting our institute, visiting our premises, being here, and thanks to her especially for a talk which was full of information, which she kept very simple to understand, entertaining, and very, very inspiring and motivating. Thank you, ma'am. I will further express my gratitude to all the IWSA Foundation members and committee members, Dr. Surekha, Dr. Devaki, and Dr. Tripta for spending their time here and arranging this talk and being with us today for the entire session. Thanks to Dr. Surekha for taking us a run through of the functionalities of IWSA. I see a lot of collaborative opportunities for our engineering students, the NSS unit, and IWSA as well. Thanks to Dr. Chintamani for presenting what Space Geeks does, and I'm sure we are going to go way ahead in this collaboration. And thanks for arranging all this, thanks being the support system throughout. It is now time to thank my home people. Thanks to our management of Father Constantio Rodriguez Institute of Technology. Thanks to Reverend Father Almeida, Dr. S.M. Khoth, the principal who is here. for all his encouragement, support, and unconditional help in everything. I extend a warm gratitude to the Dean Academics, Professor and Head of the Department, Professor Milind Shah, for his active support, advice, and involvement, close involvement in all the proceedings. Thanks to all the faculty members, especially the convener for today's program, Professor Yogesh Sardurkar, who has taken all the trouble to arrange this program. He really needs a great applause. And thanks for bringing in such a nice plethora of speeches for us and opportunities for our students. Thanks to other faculty members, Mrs. Neha Revadkar, Dr. Anand for their hospitality and background support, Mr. Santosh for all the air conditioning arrangements and other infrastructure arrangements. Thanks to the housekeeping staff, the peons and other people. My words of thanks will be incomplete without thanking my student volunteers who are actively involved for arrangements of these programs. I won't take names, but I first and foremost thank Aditi for such gracefully comparing this function. And thanks to other final year students, I can name a few, Mary Monish, Celine, Vedant, Harshada, Anika who are here, and the third yearites also, who have been here and actively supporting and being with us and doing whatever work that we are telling them. I hope I have not left anybody, and last but not the least, I thank the wonderful audience that you have been here. Thanks to the outside people who have shown the spirit of science and technology by registering for this talk and coming here and asking good questions. So thanks for the interactive session as well. And lastly, I would once again thank Dr. Anita for such an interactive...
I have a gift for the IWSA.
Yeah. Ma'am is going to present some gifts to the IWSA members. So we would like to welcome ma'am to present their gifts. And I thank you all.
It's this little project I did a few years ago called Galaxy Girls, and it's about the stories of 50 women in the space program with different stories. I was one of the people featured. It's in your library. So it's really nice.
So Aditi is going to give some instructions to the audience, and then we will wind up the program.
Thank you, Megha ma'am, for your really grateful speech. I would also really thank you for giving such a wonderful vote of thanks. Your efforts have also been commendable. Thank you so much. I will just conclude everything by just small set of instructions. There will be a feedback form that everyone present here could fill, and you will get your e-certificates on your registered email ID. Apart from that, there are refreshments outside. Students can use the classroom 115 to have their refreshments. Everyone, please do not forget to collect your refreshments as you leave. We will conclude the event with our national anthem, so I will request everyone to please stand up for the national anthem.
I guess we won't depend on the playback, we'll sing. Janaganamana Adhinayaka Jaya He Bharat Bhagya Vidhata Punjab Sindh Gujarat Maratha Dravida Utkal Vanga Vindhya Himachal Yamuna Ganga Uchchal Janati Taranga तब शुभ नामे जागे तब शुभ आशीष मागे